hello, John. How fantastic. We've got you actually in where you live, the country in which you live, which is a hard thing to do because you've been Australia, you've been where? Greenland, Iceland, where have you been?
Iceland and New Zealand besides Australia in the last couple months.
Fantastic.
You've been everywhere.
So it's really great to have you back home. I'm sure your family love that. But you've been out there talking enthusiastically about, of course, the book that we love, Brain, Mind, Gene. Brain, Gene, Mind, Mind, Brain, Gene. It's one of those combinations. And we've talked a bit about it, but what we thought we'd do today, John, is just get back, and this is a bit of a historic thing too in your teaching, but something a bit down to earth and practical for our fabulous practitioners. And I've always loved since you had it in the Brain Bible way back, is seed. So first of all, let's just say hello, John.
Hi, Richard, and hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Both of you.
Yeah, it's exciting. So this seed model is really cool. Now, have you refined it? What was it in its history? Where's it going? How do we use it? It's a beautiful practical application for therapists. So I'm just going to kind of throw the seed at you, John.
Okay. Well, let me just say that it occurred to me over the last, I would say probably half of the last 43 years of being in the mental health system, that if you don't have a good foundation to work from, you're going to have a tremendously difficult time building any kind of therapeutic positive outcome. And so if you don't have these 5 healthy factors in play as the foundation, you're almost building a house on a windswept sandbar. So why even try? So there are 5 healthy factors, I didn't make them up, that are all over the research literature in terms of cognitive function, emotional stability, resiliency, and so on, that are critical to build from. And so the mnemonic seeds encodes those 5 healthy factors. So if you plant seeds, cultivate seeds over a lifetime, you'll be far less depressed, far less anxious, have more cognitive vibrancy, and get dementia symptoms later than other people. And so what are these 5 healthy factors? Again, the 5 healthy factors are encoded in the mnemonic seeds, SEEDS. First one is social connectivity. And what I'm talking about is not necessarily any kind of social relationship, but mutually enjoyable, reciprocal, loving, connective, supportive types of relationships. First E, exercise. If you're not doing exercise on a daily basis, even the World Health Organization came out with this huge study that demonstrated that not exercising on a regular basis is actually worse than smoking. Second E, education. If you're not learning something new on a regular basis, you're not building the connectivity that provides you with what we refer to as cognitive reserves. In other words, later in life, you can lose more without looking like you lost much, because there's more there to be able to lose, so to speak. The D, diet. So nutritional neuroscience, huge body of literature around the neurochemistry and the brain structure and everything that's dependent upon a balanced diet. And then finally, the last S is sleep. There's no one thing called sleep. There's a very important sleep architecture that needs to be in play on a regular basis. And if you don't have that, actually you'll develop dementia later on. You'll be more depressed. You'll have cognitive fog. You'll be more anxious and so on. So we could go over each one of these 5 factors if you like. But we can also say with confidence that if you don't get any one of these, your telomeres actually shrink. So there's a big body of literature suggesting that there are epigenetic effects of accessing, cultivating these seeds factors, both directions. If you don't cultivate these seeds, each one of them, there are negative epigenetic effects. On the other hand, if you cultivate them, there are positive epigenetic effects. In addition to that, we know that telomeres actually shrink, which is a biomarker for aging and so on. Telomeres shrink if you don't cultivate these seeds. So they're so fundamental to our structure as a body, as a brain, as a physiological system, that they are the foundation for health and mental health.
And this is the thing that I chase a lot, and I talk about a lot when people say all these things that are good for us. That we've got to do this thing that's good for us, we've got to do that thing that's good for us. And it's absolutely true. But the key to me is anything that's good for us, we've been doing for a long, 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 long time. That's why it's good for us. It's evolved into our system as a beneficial process. So the secondary thing, which is really interesting to these 5 things which are really good for us, is how is it and how it is that we have changed the natural ways of living, or the naturalness in the way we were living, where these things were clearly done as a natural process. So we have to really refigure out these just actually getting back to the way we're supposed to be in a world that seems to encourage us to not be the way we're supposed to be. And I'm sure there's plenty of other times in history and in different cultures where various parts of these seeds have been devalued or disengaged with. But in the broader sense of evolutionary history, this was the way we lived. It must have been, or otherwise it wouldn't be evolved in.
Yeah, in fact, if you look at our evolutionary history, as hunter-gatherers, and we've been hunter-gatherers for most of our development, we had a different diet. We moved a heck of a lot more. We moved in vibrant social clan structures, mutually supportive. We actually slept longer and had a better circadian rhythm. What we were learning wasn't necessarily academic and learning about the brain and all that, but we were learning about hunting and gathering and talking and so on. So if you take a look at those 5 healthy factors, they were in play to some degree and were fundamental to our evolution. And what we've done in recent years is become much more lazy. We have the illusion of social connectivity through social media and so on, and people texting us with incomplete sentences, and we have this idea that we're really having social contact and all that. We're sitting around for an inordinate amount of time, and that's why sitting is the new smoking and so on. We're gaining a lot of weight, which screws up our immune system, and we're not learning as much. And we even have these major political figures in my country and yours, more so in mine, that don't even speak in complete sentences, and they get a lot of attention for being reactionary and so on. And we're eating a lot of crap and sleeping less. So what you can see is a regression, essentially. So we're becoming more depressed, less cognitive vitality, and needing to have some sort of solution here. However, we go the easy route. We want pills. We don't want to do the seeds factors. So how do you get people to participate in a daily, let's say, schedule? Before we started talking, actually about an hour ago, a collaborator of mine on the East Coast is working with a software developer, and he's developing an app, now social media. However, the app is an effort to incorporate on a practical level. So we can agree that each one of these 5 healthy factors are really important to do. However, we forget about them because we get really busy and we say, oh, darn, I forgot that one. Oh, I didn't have time, or whatever. How can we incorporate and use the technology that we have to ensure that there's a feedback? We wear Fitbits. I have a Fitbit. You two probably have Fitbits. Well, that gives us feedback around, movement and heart rate and all that. So what I think is really important for all of the therapists is to ensure that their clients are cultivating seeds and can bring in either feedback to or with themselves to the session about what they've been doing around the SEEDS factors.
So even having a simple checklist, I mean, an app is wonderful, good technology, but a simple checklist, I'm assuming, would
exactly.
be...
And in fact, Matt, that's a real good point, because what I can do after our discussion is send you an attachment, if you will. We're just brainstorming right now, but I do have a simple checklist that's really, I call it a SEEDS log, that I could send you as an attachment. You could put it on your website.
Brilliant.
And people could download it for free. And I've been sending it out all over the place. And people can use that and just print it out, give it to their clients, and they can bring it back in. And you don't need an app. It's just paper and pencil, and you bring it back in.
Okay, wonderful. Well, how about we go through each of these? I mean, these are huge topics, obviously, and we can only touch on them. But maybe a little bit of a framework as to what are some of the really salient essential points for each of these 5 essentials of life.
Yeah, I'll just jump in before John, before I do that, because of this really interesting aspect of what we're talking about in the, because having an app, having this, there is some discussion in some factors in some areas saying, no, you've got to get back to natural life and go back to doing things that are weird. Although having an app to tell you to exercise is weird, or go to sleep is weird. But I think what we're doing is saying that, okay, in this environment, we've changed the environment, which has changed the motivators and the stimulators, but we haven't changed our attention to those motivators and stimulators. I mean, it was really easy to go to sleep 10,000 years ago because the sun went down and there were no lights. Right. It was really easy to get exercise, because if you didn't go out and chase the woolly mammoth, you didn't eat. And education was vital, because if you didn't keep learning about your environment, it killed you. So we're not going to get those same motivations. We do need...
So let's take each one of them slowly, one by one, and just talk about them in general.
Yeah.
So let's do it in reverse, because you did talk about how 10,000 years ago, roughly 10,000 years ago, that we began to develop agriculture in some areas of the world. Yeah. But in general, most people were hunter-gatherers and did go to sleep when the sun went down and so on, didn't have screens to look at and everything. So first of all, let's develop a larger perspective around what sleep is. And then we'll talk about some sleep hygiene factors that are a part of the methodology that's referred to as CBT for sleep hygiene. There's a whole body of literature around that. So there's a sleep architecture that we have been impairing in many ways, because we've been not only consuming substances that have lowered the level of stage 4 sleep, or now it's collapsed into 3 and 4, but we're really talking about slow wave sleep, as a result of consuming, let's say, if I was drinking green tea right now, which I love to drink, but it's for me, it's now 5:30 in the evening. For you, it's the morning. And so if I was in the morning, I'd be fine with drinking green tea. Well, that lowers even if I could sleep tonight, I would not have as much slow wave sleep. If I drink some alcohol, I decrease slow wave sleep. Well, those are all obvious ones. Here's a couple very important ones that we get caught up in, because we like to medicalize a lot. A lot of therapists refer their clients to a prescriber, whether it be a nurse practitioner, a psychiatrist, a general practitioner, whoever, psychologist in some states in the United States. And they prescribe sleep medication, which unfortunately actually screw up slow wave sleep. So benzos, which is really the garbage of our healthcare system. I'm talking all the benzos, like not just Valium and Ativan, Klonopin and Xanax and all those. They decrease slow wave sleep. Also, the snower, the bonker, trazodone is being prescribed. And also, by the way, people are going to pharmacists or in your country, chemists, stores, and getting over-the-counter sleep medication that has Benadryl in it. Well, the World Health Organization, who I like to refer to because they do big population studies, have pretty clearly shown that people that use Benadryl-like substances over many years are more likely to develop dementia later on. They're also more likely to be depressed and have cognitive fog. So we have all these sleep depressors that we need to do something about, meaning minimize. And also it incorporates an understanding of the D factor, which is the diet factor. So simple carbohydrates and other factors like that we could later talk about also decrease slow wave sleep. Another thing that decreases slow wave sleep is actually what we're doing. We're looking at computer screens right now. And if I was sitting here at 9 o'clock in the evening looking at a computer screen, I'm looking at a range of light that's going to signal my pineal gland that it's daytime outside. Don't secrete the circadian rhythm neurohormone called melatonin, which will then create an insomniac kind of cycle. So I do want to say something actually about melatonin too that's important. There are a lot of people out there and they're now taking melatonin as a sleep agent, and it's a neurohormone for the circadian rhythm. If you take it on a regular basis, you're actually taking seasonal affective disorder in a bottle. So let me explain what that's all about. So you all know what seasonal affective disorder is, and that is that during the winter months in the extreme high latitudes in the northern hemisphere, the extreme low latitudes in the southern hemisphere, there's less light. And as a result of that, as a result of the diminished full spectrum light, your brain now thinks, because you're getting less activity in your retina, signaling your pineal gland, less signaling that it's daylight outside, so it's nighttime. Well, then your pineal gland secretes more melatonin, which now competes with serotonin for the same receptor sites, right? And we call that seasonal affective disorder. Well, there are a lot of people who take it in a bottle. And then they come to people like us and they go, geez, I'm depressed. I can't figure out what's going on. And, in the process of discovery, we find out that they're taking all these sleep depressors, including melatonin, which increase their depression, their cognitive fog, and they're not really getting good quality sleep anyway. Because there's tolerance and withdrawal. Now your pineal gland doesn't secrete it on a regular basis and all that. So we can go on and on about that, but I just wanted to refer to that because that's a real important factor. The reverse of what we're doing right now, if I was talking late at night, I'm decreasing my melatonin secretion, and other people are increasing it and getting depressed. So what we need to do is have a good circadian rhythm, meaning good access to light. Now we'll roll into some sleep hygiene factors. So if I do have insomnia, or I have a client that has insomnia, what I want to do is maximize my early exposure to full spectrum light in the morning. That sets my circadian rhythm. So we have a lot of people that go to buildings and they sit in a building and they don't get that full spectrum of light, and then they have insomnia for a whole range of other reasons in addition to not getting the full spectrum light. So we could say that fundamentally, early in the morning, full spectrum of light, which sets the circadian rhythm for the night. But Matt, you had a question. I see.
Yes. So if we're going to a building and they have full spectrum white, like fluorescent lights, does that do the same thing? Does that sort of signal to our brain that this is, daytime? Does it do the same thing as being out in the sun?
Well, let me just first say that a lot of buildings don't have full spectrum light anyway, because they have these fluorescent lights that don't give out the full spectrum. Okay. But let's say if they do. Okay, so now they work late in the evening and they're getting too much light. Right? Yeah. And so now they don't have to be even looking at a computer screen. What they're doing is adapting to what our
Another day.
hunter-gatherer ancestors didn't adapt to, and that is,
Yeah.
so they're actually creating an insomniac kind of situation. So light is fundamental. Now and light is actually related to body temperature as well. So if you take a look at the interaction between body temperature and light exposure, what you can see is that if you get really good quality light early in the morning, let's say, you'll more likely develop the capacity to have cooler body temperature in the evening, and you need that cooler body temperature in the evening. A lot of people make the mistake of going to bed really nice and cuddly underneath their duvet, and you might be in Singapore and you still have a duvet. What for? I mean, really, unless you have your air conditioner blasting. When I was down under with, a couple of weeks ago, you guys were just getting out of summertime and big duvets all over the place. Well, you can get to bed, or sleep rather, but you're going to end up waking up 2 hours into your sleep cycle. So you can get to sleep because of the sleep debt. So there's this neurohormone that actually produces the capacity to go to sleep that builds up sleep debt. It's adenosine. And actually, by the way, caffeine blocks the adenosine receptors. That's why when we drink caffeine, we're blocking the adenosine receptors. And sleep debt really is the buildup of adenosine. Now, you can get to sleep with your cuddly duvet, but you're not going to be able to sustain the sleep if you're overcovered and your body temperature is not dropping. So you need to continue the drop by going to sleep cool. You want to be kind of curling up and sort of trying to create some body temperature without the external load of covers, blankets and so on. And so a lot of people miss that when they're working with their clients, that not only is light critical, but also body temperature is really critical. There's another way to maximize body temperature, and that is when you exercise, another one of the SEEDS factors, which we can talk about. If you do it 3 to 6 hours before you go to sleep, in that window of time, let's say, for example, you go to sleep at 11 o'clock at night, so you're done by 8. So you might do it in the window between 5 and 8. Wonderful time to go for a walk, let's say after dinner, instead of going for the dessert, the sugary thing and all that, which screws up sleep. You take a brisk walk, and that will actually create a metabolism so that you can more readily decrease body temperature later on. You don't want to go to sleep right after you exercise because your body temperature is way up. So exercise is an important factor. If you only exercise once a day, that's the time to do it.
So just quickly jumping in the framework of all this, which is brilliant and fabulous, is also just highlighting the collective look at all those things in the nature of us as a complex system, which we talk about a lot as well. So what we're saying is we have the relationship of light, and our exposure to light has direct relationships to what goes on in the nature of our neural experiences. What's really important to just want to highlight is that sleep is not one thing. Sleep is actually a couple of things. As you're saying, we have this adenosine, or we pronounce it differently. I don't know. I think my teacher was Irish.
That's fine. So, we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, but we're adenosine, which is actually a frontal lobe activity, which comes from it's the nucleus basalis that's doing interesting processes in the front of the brain. Then you've got various activities in the back of the brain, and reminding that melatonin and serotonin are related because they are actually produced out of tryptophan, which is coming from our carbohydrates. So that's why they're married to each other, and when you've got too much of one, it occupies the other person's stuff. And of course, the importance of light just coming in here in the production of things like vitamin D, which is really important from the skin surface, which then vitamin D becomes one of the gene. The stimulant of gene production in the brain, which has direct relationships to sleep. So that's just a quick sort of running around saying, no, we're not there's no one thing here that's doing one thing, and you're not certainly saying that, but just reminding everybody what's beautiful is the fact that all these things are flowing in, and what we keep doing in our culture and our society is isolating behaviors and isolating elements that interfere with this beautiful flow that we developed while we were wandering around the savannah looking for small animals and fruits and berries.
So when we come back to our checklist of these 5 things, it's like John, you were saying, every one of them, has to be ticked off, so to speak. We have to pay attention to every one of them. It's no good saying, oh, well, we got 3 of the 5, and that's good enough. Well, not really, because they're so intertwined, aren't they?
They're very intertwined. In fact, we talked previously, and I do to a great extent in the book Mind, Brain, Gene, talk about the feedback loops.
Yes.
And there are these feedback loops that are critical for epigenetic effects, like your immune system functioning, cognitive stimulation, and so on. So all of these 5 healthy factors are related to all these other metabolic related issues and our ability to be resilient and everything else. So they are critical to be working together.
And what's beautiful is from a therapist's point of view. Now, it's really great that John Arden knows this stuff and Richard Hill knows this stuff and Matt Dale knows this stuff.
I know a bit of it, yeah.
I know you know it, but we're all sitting here. But what's really important as therapists is that you don't necessarily have to know this stuff like we know this stuff. We just do it because for some strange reason we're excited. What you need to do is you need to access us to find the reliability. But if you work on these processes, if you work with your client's sleep and your client's diet and their exercise and their education and their social activity, you can reliably appreciate that you're stimulating gene expression, that you're organizing the best sort of feedback loops, and that you are actually enabling these processes, even if you can't, when someone asks, what are the deeper processes that are going on, you can't necessarily answer the question. What you do is you just hand them John's book and say, go figure it out for yourself. But that's a part of why we learn these simplifications, I think, John, why we teach these simplifications. We're not expecting therapists to know all the stuff.
Exactly. We need to bring it down to earth with our clients. And sure, this spectrum of, you could say, levels of understanding of the neuroscience and the epigenetics and all that, you need not know the extreme intricacies. But if you can bring it down to earth with your clients and have confidence, in fact, that there are epigenetic and immune system brain-related factors that are interrelated, then you can actually make it work with your clients. So let's talk about a few more things related to sleep, and then we'll move to the other ones.
Sure.
I mentioned, and I just want to underscore, I know this might sound repetitive, but it's very important to have clean sleep. And let me explain another aspect of sleep that we've discovered over the last 15 years. So there's this glyphemic system in the brain. So there's, there's white matter and gray matter in the brain, and there are these 1 trillion glial cells in the brain. Many different types of glial cells, microglial, astrocytes, and so on. And it turns out that during clean sleep, the microglial and the astrocytes shrink down to allow for the passage of these various toxic substances, if they build up, to be cleared out of the brain so that beta amyloid and other substances get cleared out in the cerebrospinal fluid. And what we do know is that a lot of people taking these various substances, such as Benadryl and the benzodiazepines, and even caffeine in the evening and alcohol and so on, marijuana, by the way, as well, then create a clogging of the brain. How do they create a clogging? Well, the glial cells don't shrink up, and there's a buildup of these neurotoxins that over a period of time can cause havoc in the brain, like cognitive dysfunction, dementia, depression, and so on. And in fact, in my talks, I like to show two images of two brains. One is clean sleep, and the other one is drug sleep. And what is drug sleep? We're talking about all those over-the-counter substances or prescribed substances that literally clog up the brain, and you can see a dramatic difference between the two. And so it's very important to have this idea in mind. Less is more with regard to whatever you're taking. Mm-hmm. Less medication, the better. Less over-the-counter medication, the better. Less, illicit drugs, the better. So to have clean sleep means to have a more clear mind. And so you don't get the good sleep architecture, and you don't get as much buildup of these neurotoxins over a period of time. And a lot of times when we're talking, CBT for sleep hygiene and all that, these three factors that I was just describing aren't really paid attention to. Maybe the light factor a little bit more so, but the temperature, body temperature factor, the clean sleep factor, meaning minimize all these substances and so on, very critical. A couple other real practical items that all the sleep labs are paying attention to, and that is the so-called CBT world. And that is, what does your bedroom represent? It can't be an entertainment zone. Right. It can't be a place where you're going to be talking to your partner about all the things that have been building up and all that. And you might be ready to lie to sleep, and you say, oh, you know what, I've been thinking for the last year or two, something I want to bring up with you. And I just want to get it off my chest. Well, bad time to do that. You want to do that in the morning, because what we also know is a lot of very important factors take place during sleep, like memory consolidation. And I'm not talking about explicit memory. I'm also talking about implicit memory, meaning the incorporation of various mood factors. And so you go to sleep in a bad mood, you're going to encode some neural networks that encode depression, anxiety, and so on. So what you do in your bedroom ought to be related to two things, and most of us just do one most of the time, and the other one maybe sometimes. And anything else like TVs in the bedroom or computers in there and all that, you got to get it out of there. The bedroom is associated with just those two things. Most sleep labs are really vigilant about that.
I've had clients that have had like a home office kind of in the bedroom as well, and so it's work, and so that's no good.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you're thinking about all the stuff you got to do tomorrow, and you look over there's a pile of papers and a bunch of other things, and then you even get some people that say, "Well, I like to go to sleep with the TV on because it's a sedative thing." Oh, come on. We have adapted to all sorts of crazy stuff, and just because they've adapted to having the TV on doesn't mean it's healthy. We've adapted to all sorts of not so healthy kinds of
yes. I sometimes say to people that it's not that you've adapted to it, you've just accepted it.
And it's somehow thought to be a healthy thing when in fact it's not.
But just adding that there are some processes in the sleep hygiene, just saying that there might be someone not so much misunderstanding, but not appreciating that actually just before you go to bed is a nice time to just spend a few minutes going, these are the things that I'm just sorting out, some of the issues in your life, and just putting them into some kind of set of categories. I think I'm going to work on this, but it's, as you say, not working on it as you sit there saying, I'm talking about this and doing those dealings, but just that putting them in some kind of filing system. And then when you wake up early in the morning, that's right. That's right. And offloading. So, and allowing, that's a very clean, this part of sleep hygiene. And what you very often find is your early morning thoughts. You wake up and the brain says, oh, by the way, this is how you can fix this, and that's how you can solve that. And so, but it's an ordered, gentle form rather than this disordered, frustrated, I've got to complain about things now stuff.
Exactly. And Richard, you spent a lot of time taking a look at creativity and all that. And we do know that if you do what we just talked about, you offload, you think about what you're going to be working on tomorrow, you offload it, you write it down. What happens during sleep is rather a creative process. Not only are you consolidating memories, but you're also recombining those memories, and you remember better what you could be potentially looking at working on the next day, and you wake up with a fresh mind. So the phrase that people say, I'm going to sleep on it, really makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. Really is a very important part of the creative process, is sleeping on it. Okay. So we're working backwards. We're working up the list. So diet. What are some of the key principles?
Let's take a look at the Western diet, first of all, and then we'll work on the various details. The Western diet actually, according to a lot of neuroscientists and people into nutritional neuroscience, actually results in the shrinking of the left hippocampus. Isn't that interesting? Well, the hippocampus turns out to be one of the most fragile areas of the brain. And in a gross measurement, you could say that up to 40% of your hippocampus shrinks with Alzheimer's disease. Alcohol shrinks the hippocampus. Looks like the blocking of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is another factor that can shrink the hippocampus. And it turns out that inappropriate activation in your immune system, meaning chronic inflammation, can shrink your hippocampus too. So anything that can contribute to chronic inflammation will shrink your hippocampus. And one of the things that does that is a poor diet. So why is it then that people with a poor diet, Western diet, and what is the Western diet? Basically, a lot of simple carbohydrates, a lot of processed foods, and fried foods, trans fatty acids, and also inappropriate fats. In other words, more omega-6 than omega-3 and so on. And we've been going way up on omega-6 at the expense of omega-3. I like to joke that, I've eaten or tried to eat 2 salads a day for most of my life. I don't always do it, of course. I like to say I do it. But for the longest while, I would have the stupidest salad dressing on my salads because maybe there might be some cool spices in there. But what I meant by the stupidest salad dressings was there was not good oil in there.
Right.
So anyway, so let's take a look at the most obvious factors of the Western diet. What are simple carbohydrates? They're not just sugar. It's white flour, white rice, processed foods, crackers, even though it might say, natural on it, or, whole grains. You look at the box and it's really not even a good percentage. So what we could say is the less whole grain there is, in fact, we even know that the wheat that we're eating right now is not really the wheat that we used to eat when we developed agriculture in the Western world. So the whole grains are important. And if I can say a few things about this carb fad that's out there, there's this idea that all carbs are bad. Well, what do you not want to have any energy at all? And so I know there's the paleo diet and the ketone diet and the whatever, Atkins diet and all that. And sure, you can lose a lot of weight really quickly and all that. However, I do think, of course, we're eating too much of especially the simple carbs and to some degree carbs in general. However, you do need carbs. You do need complex carbs, and most fruits and vegetables have carbs in them. And it turns out that a good spectrum of carbs, and I'm talking whole grains too, like wild rice and barley and so on. Those are important. They're energy. Whole wheat, if it's real whole wheat, is not a bad thing. But the more GMO-ish it is, the more stripped of many nutrients, and also more likely to have a lot of chemicals in it, because some of these GMO products actually are made so they can be resistant to Roundup, for example. These chemicals that they spray to keep the bugs off and so on. So we're consuming a lot of chemicals, not even knowing we're doing it. So anyway, I went off on the carb thing. So we do want to have complex carbs. It's an important part of your diet, but the most important thing is absolutely try to minimize simple carbohydrates from your diet, meaning white flour, white rice, certainly sugar, and the poison of the Western world, which is high fructose corn syrup, which can increase the destruction of essential fatty acids in your brain, increase free radical development, and also chronic inflammation. So Matt, you had a question.
Yes. So with simple carbohydrates, these are simpler molecules which are easier to break down, so we get the energy out of it a lot faster, right? Now, there's something about us that craves that sort of thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we have to apply some restraint, maybe even some prefrontal control to regulate what would be a natural desire to get hold of simple carbohydrates. Is that right?
Exactly. And previously we talked about gut bacteria, for example, and there's 1,000 different types of gut bacteria. We want to have a good wide spectrum of them. And in general, we have roughly about 90% of them in these two broad categories, the Firmicutes and the Bacteroides. And the Firmicutes love simple carbohydrates. And what do? Well, they feed on it. They make us feel like we want some more of it. And what do they do once they're fed? Well, they like to store fat cells, and they contribute to chronic inflammation. And they also contribute to gut permeability, especially if you add in lipopolysaccharide, or LPS. And how do you get that? Well, you can eat a lot of saturated fat. And so just think of a hamburger. You've got simple carbohydrates, the buns, and then saturated fat, the fatty, burger, and which will contribute to the LPS. And you eat that on a regular basis, you have more gut permeability, which means essentially more chronic inflammation, dysbiosis in your gut. So your gut bacteria feeds on different types of nutrients. So what we want to do is feed the Bacteroides. So the more of the Mediterranean diet that you have, the less your gut is going to be permeable, meaning leaky, the more likely to produce this wide spectrum cornucopia of neurotransmitters, neurohormones, and all that, because, the gut's second brain, so on. And there's this information highway between your gut and your brain. And so we want to have this vibrant brain. And so we know, for example, that people that have more of a Mediterranean diet have at least a 30% reduction in depression. Big population studies have demonstrated, again, World Health Organization. So the Mediterranean diet alone is an antidepressant.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And what's interesting is evolutionarily, so going back a ways, these things exist in us because there was a usefulness every now and again to get fast food. So the bacteroids, that was for the general food that we have, but every now and again you get the opportunity to get quick lots of food, and so you had that other stuff, so we get it. But fast food was something that we only got on very rare occasions, not on every street corner 24 hours a day, and so that's why.
And now we're addicted to it.
Yeah, and because it's exactly as you say, it's supposed to be easy for the body to get, and a quick way for us to get energy in the rare occasion that it's possible or necessary to do.
In fact, let's even take a look at what happens in the brain. I like to show these two images, two panels, a cocaine addict and a so-called normal, somebody that's not a cocaine addict. That's one panel. A person that's addicted to comfort food compared to a person that's not. And if you take a look at these two panels, these comparisons between a so-called healthy brain, and I use that word in quotes, healthy, semi, and the person that's addicted to either of those substances, cocaine or to the comfort food. What is very interesting is the area of the brain that is very involved in the process of feeling pleasure and motivation, that has a lot of dopamine receptors, and there's not just one type of dopamine receptor, there's a whole bunch of different types. So take a look at two different types of dopamine receptors, D1 and D2. The D1 is the direct route to your addiction. In other words, it's directly to your basal ganglia, your caudate nucleus, and you slip right into it. Before you even know it, you're right into your old habit, whether it's Coke or comfort food. And your prefrontal cortex is going to come up with all sorts of reasons why that's a cool thing. That happens with the addiction process in either of those two areas. So what do we got to do? What we've got to do is expand the D2 receptors. The D2 receptors are the receptors that are called the indirect receptors that proliferate when you expand your number of potential positive experiences.
Okay.
And you could say that by, focusing, I know there's a lot of discussion about mindfulness and all that. It's almost become pop psychology, but nevertheless, it's a good thing. In other words, looking at what you used to regard as monotony with a sense of novelty. In other words, when you're eating something that you used to not like, you're looking at all the gradients. My God, this piece of celery tastes so different from that piece of celery, rather than the D1 is, this is celery, I don't like it. I'm going to go over here. But what we're talking about with regard to diet is to get into food, to really get into, let's say, even the slow food movement that's really popular in Europe, take some time at really getting into it. It's not quantity, it's quality that we're interested in here. And so the D2 receptors proliferate with quality, and as a result of that, you're into food. So it's not like denying yourself or just say no, and into these crazy diets of yes, no. Rather, heck, I'm into food, and I love these wide spectrum of different tastes that can I can enjoy and so on. So there's an addiction process that we really ought to be taking a look at, because the proliferators of the Western diet have torqued that. You take a look at all these fast food industries, like McDonald's or whatever, they have perfected the delivery system of for the D1 receptors. They want you to eat more. There was a potato chip in the United States that had the jingle, you can't just eat one. I don't know if it's in Australia.
Yeah, no, we've had the same thing.
Once you get it turned on, it's like one beer is the next six pack. Well, one potato chip is the whole bag, so to speak. Once you got the fat and salt in there, maybe throw in a little sugar, you got McDonald's.
Yeah, you add some insulin resistance, and away you go. We had a great film, Australian iconic film called The Castle. And very simple family, very simple people, and a couple of mates of mine were in it, which was really kind of fun. But he would get there at the head of the table, and he would sit down, and the wife would put the food on the table for him, and he'd say, "Love, this is wonderful. Look at what this is. What have you done? This is wonderful." And she'd say, "It's ice cream, darling." And he'd say, "But you've done it differently." "No, I just scooped it out, love." "No, you've done something different." But really, that's exactly what they were doing. Certainly in a very simple Australian way, but in Europe as well. You sit there and the food sits in front of you, and you go,
yeah. And you don't scoop it down and talk so fast that it's all wolfed down before. So we're talking about actually enjoying food and enjoying the diet that is actually, you change your taste buds, your taste capacity as you cultivate more healthy diet. So again, it's not just the Mediterranean diet. You can also be in the East, and you could be into the Okinawan diet. Essentially, it's the same thing. It's the food pyramid is built on fruit and vegetables, more vegetables than fruit. And sure, you got some complex carbs in there. We don't need as much protein. And if you take a look at the blue zones, by the way, these are the areas of the world, roughly about 6 or so, that are identified by National Geographic as the areas of the world that have the highest number of centurions, people that live over 100. They don't have the Western diet. They move a lot. They have the seeds factors, by the way. Very important. And it turns out that they're really not eating meat as often as we like to eat. They might be more on the fish side of things. And it's not like a little bit of other kinds of meat is going to kill you. But turns out that there are some carcinogenic factors that have been looked at by, again, World Health Organization with regard to the consumption of regular red meat and so on. And any one of these farmed animals that are pumped with hormones and antibiotics and so on. I mean, that's the stuff we're consuming. I mean, those animals consumed all those antibiotics and hormones. We're eating it.
Yeah, so it's just coming back to that mostly vegetable, whole food diet.
And I think that it's important for us as practitioners to do an inventory of what our clients are eating, rather than, hey, you eat 3 balanced meals a day. They don't know what a balanced meal is. And so we've got to coach them. And with this monitor or this log that I'll send you that you put up in your web, then the person is going to write in there what they ate. Oh, wow, you had a croissant. Well, some people think that just because it's French is cool. Well, that's just nothing but white flour. What's so cool about that?
Now, we've talked about this before, where there would be some practitioners who would say, well, hey, I'm not a dietitian, you know, I'm not supposed to be doing that sort of thing. But we've had this conversation before. The contemporary practitioner does have to have an idea about all of these areas.
This is the 21st century. If you want to be a healthcare professional, you've got to be into this. Yeah. This is part of being a healthcare professional. And sure, we're not talking about the intricacies of phospholipids and all that. If you want to get into that, you know, read my book or something like that. But still, you don't need to have that kind of level of understanding. It's just stay with the basics. Yeah. We could move to another one of the seeds factors if you like.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, so there are 3 remaining. So should we keep on going the other?
Let's keep going backwards. It makes me feel comfortable. I'm in Australia.
So education is really about building connectivity. And it's building a curiosity. I'm looking to Richard, and I'm writing it down. It's okay. I mean, it's really absolutely important, and that's part of learning. Why do I learn? Why do you learn? Why do you learn? Because we're curious. And so we don't watch movies that we already know the ending to. We watch movies that we don't know the ending to. Hopefully we'll learn something in the process, but that's a whole other thing. But if you're learning, what you're building is connectivity between these neurons that we have roughly about 100 billion of them. Each neuron has roughly about 10,000 connections with other neurons. The more connectivity, the more of an infrastructure of durability, we call it cognitive reserve. So I like to use my father as an example. So after he got his law degree before I was born, he kept going to college every single semester of my entire life, and then he died about 10 years ago. So he was in his early 80s when he died. But when he died, he was a graduate student in painting. However, he became a lawyer, became a judge, and so on. He just kept going to college all the time. And so that's sort of a prelude to what I'm going to say. So there's a museum in Paris called the Picasso Museum, and I've been there a couple times with him. And I said to him a couple times, in fact, I said, Dad, you don't like Picasso, do you? And he goes, no, I don't. I said, but I don't get it. You keep going to the Picasso Museum. Why do you go? And he said, because it's interesting. So let me describe what happens. So if anybody, the 3 of us or listeners might have been to the Picasso Museum, it like many museums, when it's built on one painter, it's chronological. So Picasso was kind of an impressionist early on during his blue period, you know, the guy with the guitar and so on. Really, you know, quite talented guy, good draftsman and everything. And then roughly around 1914, 1915, he starts hanging around with this guy named Brock. And they start developing what is called Cubism. And Cubism is basically breaking things up with these lines, and you see part of the image, but the rest of it is very abstract. And so he went through that period, and then roughly into the 1930s, he started creating these faces with noses going this way and eyes over that way and all that. So anyway, my father, I'm watching him because, you know, I'm into neuroscience and psychology. I like Picasso, by the way, but I'm in there watching him. He's going through, God, he was a good painter. He's saying out loud to me and my wife and kids. And then he gets to the Brock, the Cubist period, and he goes, what the heck is going on here? He's saying out loud. And then he gets to the period where the noses are sticking, and he goes, what happened to him? This is kindergarten art. Now, he's disturbed by that. That's my point. And so if you keep going back to what you're disturbed by, but you're curious about, then you build more connectivity. Now, we know in neuroscience that there was something called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, meaning people learn when they're a little disturbed. They're not totally in their comfort zone. They're not in the middle of a panic attack. They're a little disturbed. In other words, they're kind of going, what the heck is that? I don't really understand that. We know now memory is more strongly related to that middle of the Yerkes-Dodson curve, or we call it the inverse U, so to speak. And what he was demonstrating was neuroplasticity there. In other words, we remember things when we're out of our comfort zone, we're moderately activated, we're a little disturbed. So in therapy, we could say, what Fritz Perls used to say is you need a safe emergency. Well, you need the safety of the therapeutic envelope, the attunement, the alliance, whatever you want to call it, the attachment, transference, whatever theory group you're in. We all agree, you know, the relationship's stupid. We get that. But also you need the emergency part. And the emergency part is we're now asking them to do some things they don't feel like doing. That's what creates the change. Yeah, and that's what creates new connectivity.
We would call that controllable incongruence.
Yeah, exactly. Another wonderful way to kind of conceptualize it. Because you've got the controllable part, which is this therapeutic relationship, the safety, the attunement and all that. But the incongruence is what? The heck is that? Let me see if I can bridge that gap there.
Exactly.
And that's learning. That's learning. It isn't therapy learning.
And in the curiosity approach, I'm always talking about looking for what else it could be other than what it is, which is also that constant thing that you might not even see an incongruence, but there is one.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm always looking for.
Right, and so you and Ernie Rossi and Erickson and other people would have these pregnant sort of ideas out there. Like Erickson used to say, well, why don't you go climb, you know, Squaw Peak? And he goes to climb Squaw Peak, and well, the guys go, why am I going to be doing that? Well, he had this insight that, you know, it's not all the learning in the therapy, it's what they do between therapy sessions, so to speak. But anyway, back to learning and back to the whole concept of education. You build a healthy brain. And so if you're not learning on a regular basis, you're looking in the rearview mirror. You're looking at all the stuff that have accumulated, and you're really not making anything out of it in the future, because remember, our prefrontal cortex is always looking ahead, unless you are looking in the rearview mirror. And if you're not learning anything new, you're looking in the rearview mirror.
Right.
About all the terrible stuff that has happened to you and everything. We know that's a big part of post-traumatic growth.
Right.
We know that's a lot about resiliency, that you're looking ahead, you're learning new things. So education is fundamental to the stability of therapy. Meaning you're building on new insights, and it's not just one idea, it's the infrastructure over time.
So, John, one of the most fascinating aspects of this cognitive reserve that we can build up, building up a more complex neural system to be resilient to, some of the things that can happen to our brain as we age. I remember this study, a nun study, and I was wondering if you could just give us a brief outline of what that study was, which really showed the brilliance of how we are made in terms of being resilient to things like dementia.
Sure. And let me just say that even though you made a slip about the nurse and the nuns, the nurses study actually showed the same thing in only a more complex way. But let's take the nun study. And the nun study was a review of the cognitive and emotional capacities of this group of nuns in Minnesota. And I think the researcher was named Snowden. And so these nurses decided that they were going to will their brains to science. Okay. And so these were really interesting. Did I say nurses? I meant nuns. But these nuns were going to will their brain to science. And so they were really interesting nuns. They were involved in all sorts of things. There were teachers and contributors to the community, and they were learning all the time and all that. And one of those nuns, I think her name was Sister Mary, was one of the brightest light bulbs there. And I think, if I get the dates right, I'm not quite sure. She might have died at age 92. I'm not sure. But anyway, she had, pretty good longevity.
Yep.
She had no signs of dementia at all during her life. Mm-hmm. And in fact, she was pretty bright up until her death. Mm-hmm. And the autopsy revealed that she had builds up of beta amyloid and tau protein, which we could say in the dementia neuroscience area are two of the hallmarks, or at least associated with Alzheimer's disease. We're not quite sure the cause and effect issue and all that. However, she had full-blown development of beta amyloid and tau protein.
Wow.
And you could say that, whoa, why would that be the case? Why didn't she have dementia-like symptoms? Well, this is the reason you brought her up. Because she had better cognitive reserve. Yeah. So she had more to work with, even though parts of her brain seemed to be, compromised. She had more connectivity because she was incredibly educated, you could say, always learning, building what we call cognitive reserve.
Well, so there's hope for me. I'm always learning.
Well, hope for all of us. Hope for all of us.
Except now we have to take you out and exercise you.
Oh, yes. Okay, exercise. Yes.
Okay.
Second one from the top.
Okay, so exercise, and I'm going to use World Health Organization, has identified it as probably the most important of all the SEEDS factors. Wow. And so what's exercise? Well, again, hunter-gatherers, we move roughly 10 miles a day. Who moves 10 miles a day anymore? And now people are saying if you don't move 10 miles a day, then you are actually compromising your brain. So in the organization I used to work in for roughly about 26 years, we did this conference in Washington, D.C. once. And the guy that spoke right before me, he was an internal medicine professor from University of British Columbia. He said that not exercising on a daily basis is worse than smokodiabetes. Smokodiabetes. If you smoke, you got diabetes and you're obese, that's better than not exercising on a regular basis. So movement is critical for multiple factors. So let me just rattle out a few. So there are multiple metabolic factors that take place, neurogenesis factors, neuroplasticity factors, and there are a number of brain rebuilding factors. So the most popular, of course, is BDNF, or brain-derived neurotropic factor, that's very much involved in the development of new neurons, neurogenesis, in the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. Very important. And exercise is the best way to get that. Exercise, we're talking, getting your heart pumping for 30 minutes, a little sweat and everything everything else. Well, there are other neurotropic factors that are very important, GDNF and other factors, but let me include a few other rebuilding factors that are important. VEGF, which is called vascular endothelial growth factors. So think of this. You know, we've got not only just arteries going up to our brain, but also capillaries all over the place. Mm-hmm. And as we age, or if we are unhealthy, these little capillaries, these these blood vessels, can get stiff and rigid. Right. And when they get stiff and rigid, they can pop little aneurysms all over the place. I mean, you can get MCI, mild cognitive impairment, especially later in life, but some people during middle age get it. So vascular endothelial growth factor, VEGF, is one of the great results of aerobic exercise. Let me use another one, IGF factor, and that's insulin growth factor. Yeah. Insulin growth factor is really very fundamentally important for getting energy into cells, because we have a problem with the Western diet and everything else where we've got so much glucose floating around, we've got insulin resistant receptors, right? Diabetes. You don't want to have diabetes of the brain. It's called Alzheimer's disease. So a lot of neurologists are now referring to Alzheimer's as diabetes type 3. So what's that about? It's about the brownout of the brain. Well, you can get brownout of the brain by bad diet and all that, developing insulin resistance or pre-diabetes. But also what we want to do is maximize the energy intake. How can you do that? With IGF, another of the benefits of aerobic exercise. So we know that people that exercise on a regular basis are less depressed. It is the best antidepressant that we have. Multiple studies have demonstrated that it's better than psychotherapy, better than antidepressant medication, better than psychotherapy and medication combined. Mm-hmm. And so when people say, well, I'm depressed, but I don't feel like exercising, I take them for a walk. Or I require that, in fact, that's what they're doing prior to seeing me. In fact, I try to do it before, you know, and I feel much more relaxed and more in tune.
Yeah. To go for a walk and get outside and see the sun.
Exactly. I've already done that. See this hill? I'll just show you. I've already gone way down there. Do you see the bottom of the hill right there? Just to get my mail, I go way down there. And way up there is about 13,000 feet. Can you see that in there?
Yes.
And all these ridges over here, I have to do that daily, or at least some approximation of that.
Fantastic.
Okay, exercise. So do we have more? Do we have more on exercise, or should we move?
Oh, well, maybe we move on. We're just let me just for time, or is there one more thing?
Two other things that I really want to raise here, because we haven't talked about inflammation, and I did mention that the SEEDS factors with poor quality sleep, bad diet, and now no exercise contributes to chronic inflammation. Exercise decreases chronic inflammation as measured by one of the inflammatory markers, which is called C-reactive protein. That's a protein produced by your liver. We can actually see inflammation lower with regular and daily exercise. So what we want to do is turn off inappropriate activation in your immune system, and exercise is one of the ways to do that. One of the most important and easiest ways to do that.
Yeah. And we know inflammation is like an enormous topic. And if anything's going to kill you, it's inflammation, right?
Exactly. Chronic inflammation can dull your brain, contribute to depression, contribute to cognitive fog, make you more likely to get anxious. And the whole field of psychoneuroimmunology, wow, that's a gold mine. And we talked about that previously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And I do that in chapter 4 in that book.
400.
Brilliant.
Yeah, beautiful.
Okay, social connection, back to the top.
Okay, so we've been probably the biggest believers, the most strongest believers in good quality relationships and attachment and so on. It turns out that now there's neuroscience to support what we have been saying all along, which is really cool. So in the last, let's say, maybe 20 years or so, all these studies about insecure attachment, neglect, or child abuse have demonstrated that you can actually impair a person's brain by having bad quality or no relationships. And the areas of the brain that are impaired are critical for our ability to look at one another, read one another's mood, and so on. So what happens, interestingly, is, let's take child abuse, is there's less development in the left prefrontal cortex, more development in the right prefrontal cortex, strongly associated with anxiety and depression. But if you also take a look at their brains, and I often show these in my talks, of an abused brain versus so-called normal, what not only do you see more on the right than the left, but you see less overall development in the prefrontal cortex for neglect and abuse. And so what we also see with loneliness and with the illusion of connectivity by, thinking that you're connected with other people, you really don't have any mutually supported relationships and all that. And the capacity to feel empathy for another person is that there are areas of the brain that actually decrease their activity, like the anterior cingulate, the anterior insula, and this area that we exercise all the time as therapist types, called the temporal parietal junction on the right side, which is right back here. It gives us the capacity for cognitive empathy. And also, there's a whole bunch of different types of neurons that are called spindle cells. Do you remember talking about those? Our friend Lou Cozzolino was the one that actually introduced me to them roughly about 15 years ago, and I've been bathing and trying to understand ever since. And it turns out that we have more spindle cells than any other species. As an example, we've got maybe about 280,000 spindle cells as an adult, and an adult ape has roughly about 7,000.
Wow, okay.
Just incredible. And where are they located? In the areas that I mentioned before, the anterior cingulate, the insula, and so on. And more so right side than left side, by the way. So why am I going off on all these neuroscience kinds of things? Because these brain networks are hungry. And if they don't get activated, there are other parts of our body and our brain that react. And some of those factors are epigenetic and our immune system. And so what we find is, with the field of psychoneuroimmunology, is you don't have good quality social relationships, a good sense of feeling felt and being able to generate that and be gracious towards one another and loving and so on. You don't develop those areas of the brain, and you don't feel as much empathy for another person. And so this is critical to our immune system activation. So in the field of psychoneuroimmunology, we know that people that don't have good quality social relationships actually have flat immune systems. They don't work as well.
Right.
And they have more anxiety, more depression, and so on. Okay.
Now, for the therapist who is looking at the social connectedness aspect here of seeds, and what would be the suggestions? Because you're saying that social media, which is now, probably the biggest way that most people connect, isn't giving us enough or of the right thing. So what should some of the suggestions be when you need your client to get out and be more socially connected?
Well, I do want to say that social media isn't bad in itself. It's the time element. Right. Checking your email, sure, why not? If you have a Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever, sure, that's fine. It's a tool as opposed to an addiction. And it turns out even some studies have demonstrated that just hearing your ding come in, there's a burst of dopamine from your ventral tegmental area. Just, oh my God, somebody texted me. It could be nothing. It could be junk mail. So we can get addicted, and the addiction is the problem, and how much time is spent. So what would be the suggestion around what to do with our clients. Well, we need to do a time element. I mean, and with the log that I'll send you, it's did you spend any time with your friends or relatives that are really capable of reciprocal relationships? I don't mean these draining relationships, there's one side and you feel emotionally exhausted because the person's sucking the life out of you. That's worse. But it's mutually compatible, mutually nurturing relationships, people that care about you. And most important, that you can care about other people, because if you can express and cultivate compassion, it's an antidepressant.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking about physically going and having a coffee with someone on the phone, not leaving a blog post or a Facebook post, or it seems rather strange that we have to sort of tease it out like this and make it very obvious. But it is the social media world now that we are in. A lot of people really do. They're 99% of their social contact is in a virtual world.
Exactly. We can call this junk food.
Okay.
Junk social connection. I mean, one of the things which is an interesting thought, which we haven't done any research to say it, is that one of the biggest problems is the short message system and the abrupt message system. And one of the thoughts is whether the nature of the connection over social media will improve if we use longer sentences and be more fully expressive. And the same thing can be said for emails. Anyway, that's just a thought to put in there, because we're a long way from seeing whether that makes any difference. I feel it does, but we don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Interesting.
Fascinating. Well, we've covered all of the 5 of the seeds, and we will have this resource for everybody to be able to download. Thank you so much, John.
And well, thank you. Great talking to you guys again.
I hope that every therapist out there now has a checklist of seeds that they can go through with their clients.
Yes, and some very good knowledge of growth factors in the brain.
Absolutely.
I know, I love it. That was great. I was sitting there going, VGF, that's right. Oh, I'd forgotten about that one. See, that's the use of great, but it's really great, John. We appreciate it very much.
Yeah, well, as usual, it's always fascinating sitting down and, well, I'm standing up at the moment because I'm trying to use a bit more energy while I'm looking at a screen and having a chat with you, John. Thank you so much for coming on to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast.
Always delighted to spend time with you guys.
Okay, thank you.